the the interview on Zoom just so I have video visuals as well.
Of course.
And I'll have a backup recorder.
Sure.
So yeah, I just kind of want to start off again with some just basic background information. So if you can tell me when you were born.
Sure. I was born on April 28th, 1961, Highland Park General Hospital.
Oh, awesome. So are you from Highland Park?
Well, uh, my first 5 years were spent in Detroit, in a home in Northwest Detroit.
Okay.
And after coming home from Highland Park General Hospital, and then we
Mhm.
moved to Farmington Hills when I was 5.
Okay. Wow. So you've been there your whole life.
I was away for, I don't know, about a dozen years. College and then post-college years were spent away from Detroit. And when I married my husband, Dennis Tini, who was living in Detroit, I moved back
Okay.
I was in Boston at the time.
Okay. Awesome. So I think it's so funny that your name is April. You were born in April. That's kind of I don't know if that had anything to do with your parents naming you that or
I think it did.
okay.
I think it did.
Yep. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so you said you were basically you were born and spent the first 5 years of your life in Detroit. What part of Detroit, if you remember, like growing up or
Yeah,
the
it
first
was a
5 years?
7 Mile and Evergreen area.
Oh yeah.
And I think that at the time we were close to the Henry Ford High School.
Hmm.
And that's where I would have gone to high school. And I'm not sure which middle school, maybe it was Pitcher. There was the elementary that I'm trying to think if I attended elementary. I think I might have done a portion of the kindergarten year. Maybe it was Pitcher Elementary, Pitcher. Anyway, we moved to Farmington Hills in the middle of kindergarten. So I think I did the first half in Detroit and the second half in
Okay.
Farmington.
Yep. Awesome. So where in Farmington Hills did you grow up?
Area of 13 Mile in Orchard Lake Road. And I did
Okay.
the Farmington schools and ended up at North Farmington High School. It was a great education. And toward the middle to the end of high school, I think I really got serious about music.
Hmm. That's awesome. So lifelong like Farmington Hills resident. It's
Yeah,
really nice out there as well. Yep.
yeah. It's a great area to grow up in as a child. It has become a very diverse community, and I loved
Hmm.
raising our daughter here.
Hmm.
And it's a rich, full community with a lot of cultural, there's a cultural end, there's the fun
Hmm.
athletics with the high schools, and it has become a more diverse community. Like I said, they have a great
Yep.
farmers market, nice downtown area.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, I agree. I was actually so when I lived in Farmington, I lived in Farmington first, then Farmington Hills, but I was just like right off like by the downtown, like Grand River area. So yeah.
Fun, so fun. I love it there.
It is. So if you could tell me a little bit about your maybe your parents, what were their names and where were your parents from? Like, did they grow up in Detroit or if they were from a different state?
Yeah. My parents were both first generation born American. They are both 100% Armenian, and their parents, my grandparents, were all survivors of the Armenian genocide of
Mm.
1915.
Oh
So
wow.
my grandparents came over in the late 19 teens, early 1920s, got themselves set up as like as teenagers, and then arranged marriages. And along came both my parents in 1933.
Hmm.
Both of my parents were born in Detroit, and they were both born into loving but poor Armenian families. And
Hmm.
their memories of growing up are of um, just fiercely loving families and cousins and aunts and uncles that all took care of each other because they were all coming from the old country. They all had to build a life. My parents parents did not speak English. So when my parents went to school at 5 and 6 years old, they didn't speak English. They had to learn everything. And they came home and educated their parents. And in turn, their parents just showered them with love and a sense of family and heritage. And that's what I grew up with. My parents met when they were in their early 20s at a mutual friend's wedding. And they got married in 1958, and they settled in Detroit. I was born in 1961. My mother was working for General Motors as a secretary, and she was a very successful semi-professional singer. She sang with the Don Large Chorus, who did shows at the Fisher Building. And she sang with a couple of other organizations. She became very active. she became very active in Sweet Adelines, and as a barbershop quartet harmony singer, her quartet won the International Barbershop Champion in 1959.
Oh, wow.
So she did a couple of really cool things as a singer. And my father was an extraordinarily dedicated family man, wonderful husband, father, and she too has been a great mother. I'm so blessed with great parents. My father graduated Highland Park High School, went to the Army, served in the Korean War. When he came back, he went to work for General Motors in the press room on the line, and he got himself educated over a 10-year period at night school with Detroit Institute of Technology, which is now Lawrence Tech, right? They've been incorporated into Lawrence Tech anyway. And so he got himself a Bachelor of Administration degree, but that degree didn't come until he was in his early 30s, and he was raising 3 young children. So he would go to work all day and then go to school all night. And they were self-made. My parents, they built a loving home for us, and we had an idyllic childhood in Farmington Hills. And my parents always had lots of family and lots of friends and a lot of interests. There was always music in the home. My mother with her singing career, and my father was a great church bass. He had a fantastic ear and natural voice. Didn't read a lick of music, was never educated or trained, as opposed to my mother, who had a lot of experience, but they both sang in the church choir. And then I came up singing in the church choir. And we would also harmonize at home our little church hymns and some of the, folk, like sort of American folk songs of the day, like Let Me Call You Sweetheart and You Are My Sunshine and stuff like that. So there was always music. We were always singing. My mother played the violin. I started on the violin, and I moved to piano before I became serious about singing. I have 2 younger sisters who are great people. They love music, but didn't choose it as a profession. And we're all very, very close to this day. We just lost my father at 88 years old on August 25th, 2021. And
sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Rather than being sad, we choose to celebrate the great life that he had. So, and my mom is 88 going on 60. She's
That's awesome.
She's basically the mayor of her senior living community, which is Foxborough. I've had a beautiful family upbringing, and they were extremely supportive because I went fast and hard into music. And I've had, like really professionally, really a 38-year career and counting. And before that, it was all college music. Before that, it was high school music. And so my family's been very supportive.
That's awesome. It sounds like you definitely had, like I said, great upbringing, and it always just obviously makes the person, even more well-rounded when they come from a great background. I just want to kind of just back up just a couple questions based on what you were talking about with your parents. Was there like an Armenian community in Detroit? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like where in Detroit, where was that Armenian? Because I don't know, everyone's like, it's different areas. Yeah. That's a
great question, Veronica. And yes, there was a large community of Armenians in Detroit. When they came over and they all landed on Ellis Island, in the early, the late 19 teens, a lot of Armenians settled in Boston and New York and Chicago, and then many came to Detroit because of the work in the auto industry. And then the other large Armenian communities are out west in California. But in the Detroit area, I think my grandparents ended up here because they had family members here, and there was work. So there was a very large Armenian community, and there are 3 or 4 churches that really flourished in, I would say, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and are all doing quite well today. It's just that back then, the Armenians married the Armenians, and much of it was arranged, or much of it was just, that's what you did. You married someone within your heritage community. And then there were a lot of kids at the churches. But with the subsequent generations, they didn't all marry Armenians. And so the Armenian churches are somewhat a little bit less populated than they were, say, 50 years ago. But the communities were cousins and neighbors and friends and churchgoers, and your parents' friends who came from the same villages. Their parents came from the same villages in Armenia and in Turkey. And they have these heart-wrenching stories of literally marching across the desert, and the atrocities that you have heard about, the atrocities that we've seen with the Holocaust that happened to the Jewish people. These same things happened to the Armenians, and these atrocities happened to my great grandparents, because my grandparents have told the stories of losing parents and siblings to horrific, heinous crimes right in front of their eyes. And so that's why they grew up with such a strong sense of tight-knit community. They had each other to hold on to because they had nothing else. I mean, they came here with nothing in their pockets, and so they're all self-made. They're all dirt poor, and yet they had a strong sense of their Christianity, of course, and then also of their ethnicity that they did not want to let go. So the Armenian communities have been strong, again, throughout family connections and throughout the church.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always good to have that kind of like family history and instilled in you at a young age. Because like you said, it kind of makes you more just appreciative of what you have based on like learning about like your ancestors and kind of what they went through. It just makes you feel just like like you said, just a stronger sense of family because of what they went through. So
yeah, and trying to be grateful and trying to be worthy of everything set up for us, and trying to pay it forward and pass it on,
Yeah. So did you have other relatives here? I know you said that your parents had relatives, but it's like, you had cousins and stuff like that all lived here.
Yes. So my parents each had siblings, and then when they had kids, we had the cousin connection, and then we had the second cousin connection of my parents' cousins and their kids. So we had second and third, fourth. I think I had 16 first cousins.
Oh, wow.
Which is a lot of first cousins. And we were very close with our cousins and our grandparents growing up. And also my like second and third cousins and then family friends, we were all close. It was the bulk of our socialization, even though, to my parents' credit, they didn't keep us insulated with just the Armenians. They encouraged us to branch out. So we had neighborhood friends and school friends and eventually high school and college friends that weren't Armenian. But the Armenian core of our upbringing and our family and our sense of heritage is always there. So yes, we were around a ton of Armenian kids, Sunday school at church, and then the cousins.
Right. Yep. That's awesome. What church did you grow up going to?
Ours is it's the Armenian Protestant church, and it's called the Armenian Congregational Church of Greater Detroit.
Okay.
And it is, I think it's 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
That church, I think we celebrated about 4 years ago. I can't remember exactly, 2016, 2017, we celebrated the 100th anniversary. And that would make sense because when my grandparents came over after the genocide, they established themselves in the late 19 teens here in Detroit, and they founded that church. My grandparents, as well as a couple dozen other survivors of the genocide, founded that church. And so that church was so extremely important to my father because his parents founded that church. And so my father and mother were pillars in their generation of their church. And I still belong to the church, and I serve the church musically. But there are also some Armenian Orthodox churches. There's one called St. John's in Southfield. There's one called St. Sarkis in Dearborn. Ours is called the Armenian Congregational Church of Greater Detroit and in Southfield. And then there's another one. I think it's a much smaller Armenian Catholic church. And unfortunately, I don't know a lot about it. I don't know if it still exists or what its name is, but at some point, I think there were 4. I know there are 3 major ones in Detroit. Ours is a smaller one. The other ones are larger, but small but mighty.
And you said it's in Southfield, the church you go to?
It's on 12 Mile Road at Northwestern Highway. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. I probably have passed some on the area all the time. That's awesome. Yeah. And that's great that, like I said, having that church kind of be kind of the foundation of your family, to say your family founded it, and just to continue to be there. It's great that it's continued to have that family bond.
I've lived in Chicago and Boston. I was really happy to come back to Detroit because I have so many strong roots here.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it for sure. That's awesome. So you were kind of talking about also as well, just kind of having your mom and your father both had. That was actually one of my questions. So I'm glad you mentioned having musical background, because I was going to ask you like how you got interested in music, but it seems like maybe it has something to do with your mother being a vocalist as well as your father being a bassist. Is that kind of what gravitated you towards music?
Yeah, well, there's no medical evidence of this, of course, right? But when my mom was pregnant with me, she was touring the country with her barbershop quartet that had just won the championship. They were the
Okay.
1959 International Queens of Harmony, which is the Sweet Adelines. So international champions, right? And it was a big organization. And so they would ride the bus and the train and sometimes the airplanes to all kinds of places. And they were the guest vocalists. And she was doing that for a couple of years after they won the championship while she was pregnant with me.
Hmm.
I can't help but think that had something to do with me
Yeah, you
wanting
were
to be
listening to it in the
wanting
womb.
to be a singer, because all I heard, in my pre-birth years, pre-birth months rather, were in the womb, I heard harmony, harmony, a cappella harmony. That's what barbershop is. And it was women's voices singing a cappella harmony and doing it pretty well because they were the international champ. So I came out hearing that. And then she sang, there was music in my house all the time with the quartet would come over and sing. So then I'm hearing it live. And then we'd go to church and there would be my grandparents and my dad were all rooted in the Protestant hymns. And we'd sing that a lot too. So I think it did have something to do with it. My mother also played she also played the violin, and she wanted me to learn how to read music. So she set me up with violin lessons at about 8 years old. And my violin teacher was my mother's cousin. So, and a wonderful Armenian lady. She claims I was her first student, and I started her whole violin studio. So, and her name was Virginia Mekjan.
Okay.
Virginia Mekjan. And anyway, she started it off for me. I wasn't a great string player, but I loved music. And so I moved to the piano and understood, theory and music composition and form. And there was never a problem for me. I always understood it. So I think I had some natural musical acumen, but then I really loved to sing. That was my favorite mode of communication. So I started voice lessons and in high school, and then went on to music major in college at Western Michigan University. But my parents' influence with music being sung inside the home. And I really believe it was a combination of the church hymns and the barbershop songs. That was my foundation. My foundation was not jazz. I didn't really become interested in jazz until college, but I did have a musical foundation up to that point.
So I'm just taking notes here.
Yeah, of course.
So I guess in terms of like you said, you definitely were kind of grounded in the church hymns and the barbershop singing.
Yes.
But I guess was that the main types of music that was played at your house? Were there any popular music that was playing today, or anything that maybe certain influences you had growing up?
I think the third, it wasn't really jazz. That I think the third influence was popular music of the day. My parents liked Harry Belafonte, and we listened to Harry Belafonte, which he was hipper than the average, pop singer of the day. They liked sort of Christian gospel music. We had that playing. And boy, my musical tastes are so eclectic, but I mean, in the house would trying to think of like the Carpenters. I grew up loving Karen Carpenter's singing voice. And the Jackson 5, my sisters and I love the Jackson 5. And so we would listen to that and Stevie Wonder. We liked Motown a lot in my house, the Supremes. And then by the time the 70s hit, I'm 10 years old, I'm making my own musical choices.
Right.
I kind of branched out into a larger pop R&B preference. And then in my late teens, when I went to college at Western Michigan University and started singing in a vocal jazz group, then I was hooked. And all I listened to for the next 10 years was just solid jazz, instrumental and vocal, soloists and group. Always loved group harmony. I've never not loved groups harmony singing. And but I also had quite a run as a jazz solo vocalist. But when I teach, I teach choirs and I teach private voice students. So I try to run the gamut. And then back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were still being educated classically. before jazz. Nowadays, you can go in and get like a straight ahead jazz degree. And you don't have to have a lot of classical background, but back then you had to have a classical background. So I have a classical background in classical choral, classical voice, and classical piano. And then the group jazz singing with a group called Gold Company, which is a world-renowned college vocal jazz group. And they're probably, Gold Company's probably 40 plus years old. And I'm a product of that group. I was a member. Then I started the junior group, the Gold Company 2. I was first director. Then I was a director of the Gold Company when the professor went on a sabbatical. And then I went on to teach vocal jazz at Northwestern University and Berklee College of Music in Boston. And then came back here and taught at Wayne State and Oakland University before I moved to the public schools.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Because I definitely want to get into your background just in being a vocal instructor as well. Because just reading your bio, I was like, wow, you've done a lot with just training up, professional vocalists and things like of that nature. So I guess just to back up for a minute, also like with so when did you graduate high school and when did you like start college?
I graduated in 1979, and my 3 years of high school were spent in choir, and I loved choir. And I played, I was taking piano and voice lessons outside of school. I was also involved in a lot of other different non-musical school activities. So while I was focused and serious, I wasn't as serious as some people who just ensconce themselves and they do nothing but music. I was more of a well-rounded kid. But I had enough good music instruction that when I went to college, I was able to slip right into the major and actually even pass out of some of the rudimentary music classes. So I can't credit my parents for giving me good music instructors in Farmington Hills. And I had a wonderful high school choral teacher who sent me to Western Michigan because he said they have one of the best music schools in the state. And sure enough, I got a great choral education there, a great vocal music education at Western Michigan, and a great vocal jazz education, just top notch. So it did start in high school. And then by the time I was in college, I was completely just an artsy kid only, in the practice room all the time. When you go to be a college music major, you really commit your life. Everybody else is at a football game or a party on a Saturday, and you're in a practice room by yourself, practicing your instrument, writing your student compositions, practicing your ear training, doing your music theory. You're in a practice room all by yourself.
Right.
And that's how a musician becomes ready to perform and play for the world and hold their own on a bandstand because they've done the work. And then when you do the work as an individual, you do, 4 years of music composition, 4 years of music theory, 4 years of music oral comprehension, 4 years of jazz, by the time you do that, you're ready.
Right.
And then you start like I did, performing with other people. Like I was in a vocal group, and then I was in like a combo with, instrumentalists and just me as a soloist. And, you're green when you're young, and I wasn't very good when I was young, but then you just keep doing it. And then you eventually are like, oh yeah, wow, I know 200 jazz standards and I can sing them. And wow, that maybe it wasn't the case 2 years ago, but you wait, you do the work, and then you wake up one day and you're ready, but then you have to keep working at it. So it's a lifelong endeavor.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Because I was going to say, like, I've heard this from many musicians. It's like, it's kind of like anything that you study. Like, you obviously, if you're serious about it, you're going to commit, a certain amount of time to making sure that you're mastering your craft. Because obviously, singing, you're going to be doing this in front of tons and tons of people. So you just want to make sure that everything is on point and perfect.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's a combination of the work that you do on your own, your woodshedding, your practicing, your commitment to, then it has to cross over into the work that you do on the bandstand with other players in public or with other singers in public. And so that the two feed off of each other. Then you have like 75% success on the bandstand, and the 25% that really didn't go well, you take back to the practice room.
Yeah. So when did you decide that you wanted to kind of like dedicate your life to doing something revolving being a vocalist or being, teaching people or whatever?
Probably 16 years old, middle of high school, because I was starting to think about college and I was starting to think about majors, and I couldn't see myself doing anything. My parents wanted me to go into business, maybe, or marketing or engineering. My dad, being a General Motors manager, executive at that point, was like, April, the General Motors is hiring women, that you can write your own ticket as a woman engineer, go get your engineering degree. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I had to do music, so I give them so much credit for supporting me when they were a little worried about it. But the concession I made was that I got an education degree instead of a performance degree, and
Right.
then there was always that fallback, teaching was never a fallback for me, because I always loved to teach. I love teaching and performing both, always have. So I got the vocal music education degree from Western Michigan, but I didn't use it right away. After I graduated bachelor's, I went on to a master's at Western Michigan. My professor said, hey, I want you to start a second group for Gold Company. We'll call it Gold Company 2. Vocal jazz is huge now in the country, and we're the leading group, and Gold Company is great, but I want to start a feeder program, and I want you to direct it. And you can have a graduate assistantship, get your master's paid for, and you can direct this group.
That's
so I'm
great.
like, okay, wow. So I was the first director of Gold Company 2 at 22 years old. I had my own choir of 24 jazz singers. Back then we had, 12 boys and 12 girls, and we had a ton of kids to choose from. So I was directing Gold Company 2, but singing in Gold Company. And then, my professor then said, oh, I think it's time for me to take a sabbatical. We'll find a different director for Gold Company 2, and you take over Gold Company. So then all of a sudden, at 24 years old or 25, I'm directing probably the leading college group in the country.
Wow.
And I kind of knew what I was doing, and I kind of didn't. But I had enough good people around me to lean on to help me. And so I got just a premier education as an educator, especially a vocal jazz educator. So I became a little bit pigeonholed, but it wasn't a bad thing, because there weren't very many female jazz educators, vocal jazz. And so all this work started to fall in my lap, because I had done Gold Company. So I was, judging competitions and adjudicating festivals and teaching private voice and doing a bunch of solo singing. And all of a sudden because my professor was one of the leading, his name was Steve Zagree. He's unfortunately deceased now, but Dr. Stephen Zagree founded Gold Company at Western Michigan University. And that's a 40-year plus legacy now. And all of his former students are the leading vocal jazz educators throughout the entire country. His former students, they've got the jazz groups at the University of North Texas. They've got the jazz groups at the University of Miami. They've got the jazz groups in Southern California. They've got them out east. These are all his former students. And so I was one of the first of his former students to go on and kind of carry on his legacy. But I'm sorry for digressing, but I just
go ahead. Yeah,
because I got a great vocal jazz education, and then that's what I went on to specialize in, was vocal jazz education, and I did it for years and years and years and years. And then I maybe it's jumping ahead too much, but at some point I wanted to have more family friendly hours, so I took a public school education, and it wasn't until 20 years after graduating college that I was actually able to put my music degree from Western Michigan, the teaching certificate, to work. But I did. It was still valid. And I went to teach for West Bloomfield schools. So I taught my first 20 years were university level educating at Western Michigan, Northwestern University, Berklee College of Music, Oakland University, and Wayne State. I taught at all those places for the first 20 years of my teaching career. And then the second 20 years were in the public schools.
Yeah, wow, that's a amazing career. Just to, start off there with college, and just kind of it seems like led to more opportunities, as you got more into it. I guess what were your thoughts when your professor asked you to take over, Gold Company, which is this world renowned vocal, and what was kind of run through it?
It was funny because my initial thought was I have to talk this over with my parents. But I think I really wanted to do it because I wasn't ready to go out at 22 and be a public school music teacher. I wasn't ready. I had so much desire to sing, to be a singer, but I had as much desire to learn more about jazz and learn more about the professional music industry. And that's how I was going to do it, was by continuing going to school. And so it was a done deal. I graduated in June of 83 with my bachelor's, and in September of 83 started my master's. And it was a great path for me, because after getting the master's degree in choral conducting, and then after that directing Gold Company for a year, then I moved to Chicago. And in Chicago, I did a ton of professional singing. I was on the bandstand doing jazz and pop band gigs. I was in the recording studio doing commercials. I sang with the Chicago Symphony Chorus. I taught private students. I taught at Northwestern. And that was just a couple years out of college. So that was all Western Michigan University set me up to have a professional singing and teaching career in Chicago.
Yeah. So how long did you teach with the Gold Company at Western?
So
I
was 2 years as the graduate assistant, and then 1 year as the director of the primary group. So I would say 3 years as a director in the program, but junior, senior, I think 5 years as a singer in Gold Company, 3 years as a conductor, and some of those years overlapped.
So you not only directed, but you also are part of, like, you sang at the Gold Company as well. Okay.
I sang every year except for the year that I was the director of the primary. So while I was teaching Gold Company 2, I was a singer in Gold Company 1.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So
Totally
I was getting so well educated. I was completely steeped and ensconced in this vocal jazz world. And I loved it, because the harmonies, the more modern groups like Take Six and the New York Voices, they came from the groups, like Manhattan Transfer and the Singers Unlimited and the High-Lows and the Four Freshmen. And then before them, the gospel singing groups. Like the Golden Gate Jubilee Quartet, groups like that. So I just loved group singing, and I loved the jazz intricate harmonies. I just loved it. But you know what? It's not that easy to have a career in vocal jazz, just vocal. It's just, I mean, we might be able to count, maybe somewhere between 25 and 50 people in the entire world in the past 50 or 60 years who have had a career in just vocal jazz. You have to, you really have to branch out.
Right.
So that's where my choral background and all the classical and solo singing, that's where I was able to have a career, because, and it's not just me. I mean, everybody has branched out and has different genres that they're comfortable with, different things that they do in order to have an umbrella music career. So I'm not unusual in any regard. That's just my particular path.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's kind of like with anything, like, you start off doing one thing, but obviously as you learn more about, singing or whatever, you branch off into doing something different, or, just kind of like expanding your the amount of stuff that you can do. So when you moved to Chicago, did you after getting your master's, did you move there specifically? I know you said you did some commercials and things like that. Like what drew you to Chicago?
My goal for Chicago was I wanted to be a solo singer. I wanted to sing jazz, and I wanted to sing commercials in the studio. Because there was a skill set that was involved. A lot, you have to be able to read music and catch on quick and sing harmonies. And it seemed like an exciting career. But jingle singing in Chicago was saturated. There were a lot of people who went to Chicago to be a jingle singer. And so what I ended up doing was I did, a good amount of jingle singing. It was fun. But it's highly competitive, and it's mercurial, and so sometimes you're hot and sometimes you're so that's why I ended up getting a nice little gig at Northwestern University. So I was downtown living and singing, but then I drive up the lake and teach at Northwestern University. I taught a class in jazz history, and I taught a class it was actually pop jazz history. It wasn't strictly jazz. It was a pop jazz history class for non-majors, and then I taught a vocal jazz ensemble for the music majors, and then I taught some private lessons at Northwestern. And I also had other private students in the area, and then I liked to sing with the Chicago Symphony Chorus, because I got to work with really high-level classical musicians, world-renowned chorus and symphony. So I was feeding the different areas: pop singing, jazz singing, teaching, classical, and living in Chicago, it was really fun. And I had planned to stay. I was just going to stay in Chicago and sing and teach, and figured it's one of the greatest cities in the world, and I was making it work. But something interesting happened. We had a jazz festival at Northwestern University, and I was singing at that jazz festival as a faculty performer. And then and also my vocal jazz group, Northwestern University Vocal Jazz Ensemble, was performing. So we had this day of a jazz festival where I was heavily involved. And at the end of the day, the guest artist was from Berklee College of Music, and his name was Gary Burton, the vibist, vibraphone.
Oh yeah, Gary Burton. Yep. Yeah.
He was our guest jazz artist for that festival. At the end of the day, he was very nonchalant and very casual. He said, I teach at this place called Berklee College of Music. It's in Boston, and you might think about, coming out and being a member of the vocal faculty. We could use you, and you might enjoy it. And I liked what I saw, what you did here. And so I want you to think about it. And I was like, I don't want to leave Chicago, Boston. I love Chicago, and so I went to my boss at NU at Northwestern, who was the head of the music department. And I said, you know what? I just got this offer. And he looked at me and he said, take that offer. He said, you will never have anything more than a part-time job here at Northwestern. You just never will. I'm telling you right now. But Berklee College of Music, you could go and have a full-time job and expand your career and he said that's one of the best pop jazz music schools in the world. You'd be crazy not to take it. And I'll never forget sitting there in his office crying, like, I want to leave Chicago, but I did. And no regrets. I mean, Berklee College of Music is one of the most special places on earth.
Yeah, I've heard great things about it. Terry Lynn Carrington's there. It's amazing. Yeah.
It is it's incomparable. So that I was able to go there. I had a full-time job as a voice faculty member. And I built a vocal jazz program, a group singing. We were the Berklee College Vocal Jazz Ensemble. We made recordings in the studio. We sang at the National Jazz Conventions. We sang in Canada at the Music Fest Canada festivals. We toured, and I wrote arrangements. I became an arranger. Then I have published arrangements, and the kids and the faculty all wrote arrangements for us. And I also had a full studio of jazz vocalists. And then I taught classes in vocal jazz repertoire. So I was teaching classes, running an ensemble, and teaching private students. And it was glorious.
It sounds amazing. And was this in the 90s when this?
Yeah, this was 1988 through 1992.
Okay.
I only had a 4-year run because I met my husband, Dennis Tini, who at the time was chairman of the music department at Wayne State. And we met when I was on the road with Berklee, with one of the choirs doing a big festival. This man from Wayne State was there, and his name was Dennis Tini, and he was the co-founder of the jazz program at Wayne State, but he's also chairman of the Department of Music at Wayne State. And he was also president of the International Association of Jazz Educators.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we met and we dated, long distance for a while, and then we didn't want to be long distance anymore. So we contemplated him moving out to Boston and me keeping that job and him going to work for Berklee, because Berklee would have taken him on. They kind of, made some offers to him. But in the end, we decided both of our families were in Detroit, and I had my roots, but he had, a huge musical career. I mean, he was just playing the piano everywhere as a jazz pianist. He was conducting choruses at Wayne State and the chairman. So we decided to come here. And so, no regrets. I mean, we've we're going to be married 30 years next year. And
congratulations.
Beautiful daughter. Thank you. We have a great home, and we've had a lot of fun in Detroit, but in some ways my time at Berklee was short. It was cut short.
Right.
Choice. But boy, it was fulfilling, and boy, did I learn. What I didn't expect was that I would learn so much when I was a teacher at Berklee.
Mhm.
I mean, all you got to do is you walk down the hall and you pop your head in here, and there's Pat Metheny stopped by for a visit that day.
Mhm.
You pop your head in here and there's Mark Murphy, the great jazz singer, giving a clinic.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, and so many jazz luminaries started there, but also people that you don't really know their names, but they're some of the greatest side men and side women ever in New York and in LA, and they have a Berkeley background. And so you just walk down the hall and you put your ear to the
Mhm.
practice rooms, and you can't believe what you are hearing.
Right.
And then you go to these recitals. There's recitals all day long, all day, every day, and the recitals are free. And these people are brilliant. They're just
Mhm.
brilliant musicians honing their craft right in front of you.
Mhm.
And so that kind of atmosphere I have never experienced anywhere.
Mhm.
I learned a lot more about, I think, jazz history and contemporary jazz improvisation, creativity, entrepreneurship, um, music business. I learned a lot about all that stuff just being a part of the Berkeley community, which is one of the most incredible musical communities on earth.
Yeah, I've heard amazing thing. I think, like I said, Terry and Lynn Carrington, I think she's at Berkeley and she's heading up their program there.
Yep. Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
it's the best in the world is there.
Yeah, it's the best. Yeah, it's the best of the best. Yeah. Is that how you were able to maybe cultivate maybe more relationships with professional jazz musicians? Is
Yes,
going through them? Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it started in college and it continued in Chicago, but in Boston, I wrote on an airplane with the members of Take Six. And when you're sitting
Oh,
on an
really? Wow.
and you're sitting on an airplane for several hours, you're sitting there and then the other
Mhm.
side of the aisle was Delphio Marsalis,
Oh, wow.
the
Yeah.
third Marsalis brother that's in the
Yep.
business, and Roy Hargrove was on that
Mhm.
plane. And
Wow.
and then back at Berkeley, you go and knock on Gary Burton's office and see what's up with him. And,
Mhm.
since he brought me there, I made him my official mentor. So
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, that's quite a mentor to have. Very, very,
I-
yeah.
yeah. And so, and then, the other thing is you go and you hang out at the clubs where everybody's playing all night long.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's where I developed a ton of professional contacts and relationships. And I also, some of my favorite people in the world are the members of the New York Voices. They are a 30-plus-year-old vocal group that, they've won Grammys. They're an extremely tight sounding, wonderful, original, amazing group of vocalists that perform. They're stunning soloists. And then as a group, they're just phenomenal. And so the New
Mhm.
York Voices were just coming up in the late 80s, and they came through Boston, they came through Berkeley. And
Mhm.
I met up with them. I'm like, hi, who are you guys? You're like a new vocal jazz group, and I'm the vocal jazz teacher here at Berkeley. And
Mhm.
there was a lifelong friendship there and
Yep.
built there. When I was there, Berkeley does this cool thing where every year at graduation they give honorary doctorates,
Mhm.
and I'll never forget. Al Jarreau was given a doctorate
Oh,
when,
wow. Yeah.
and so you just show up and there's Al Jarreau giving a concert, and
Wow.
Phil Collins,
Yeah.
and like I said, you walk, there's Pat Metheny. Oh, by the way, Pat Metheny stopping by tonight. He's going to sit in and, on Gary Burton's set. Okay.
Wow.
You know, and there was
Yeah.
rumor, I never ran into it, but there was rumor that James Taylor was around. I think James Taylor's brother taught at Berkeley. So, sometimes there's rumors, oh, so-and-so's.
Yeah.
But I mean, most of it's really, really, really awesome and really true.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you definitely uh were able to really hone your chops there at Berkeley for sure.
I did hone my chops because I did a lot of singing at Berkeley too.
Mhm.
And people just pushed me to improvise and become a better improviser and a better singer and better at taking chances and better at being
Mhm.
creative artist and trying to find my own voice. I learned all that at Berkeley. There was a
Yeah.
great foundation in my
Yep.
education, a great foundation, but it really took off at Berkeley. And it was just advantageous for me. It was fortuitous. It was a good moment in time.
Mhm.
And then I brought all that. I had so much fire when I left Berkeley. I
Yeah.
was just burning up with, and so I came and started a really actually, I didn't start it. Someone else started it, but I took over a nice program at Wayne State. And for about 10 years, we had a great vocal jazz group at Wayne State, and we toured, and we went to Disney World, and we went to some of the jazz, Chicago to perform at the National Jazz Convention, and did a lot of gigs around town. And so it was fun having a vocal jazz group at Wayne State, performing with big bands and stuff. And at Oakland University, I started a jazz group too, but I was also directing a show choir. And there's another part of my education and my educator that I teach pop and show music as well as jazz. And I've had show choirs under my direction. I've had pop ensembles, pop choral.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because how long were you at? So were you at Wayne State the same time as Oakland University, or did you?
Yeah, I was at Wayne from 1991 to 2001. No, I'm sorry, 1992 to 2002. I apologize. 1992, 2002 was Wayne State. In that time, there was about a 5-year span at Oakland University. I'd say 1992 to maybe 96, something like that. I was at Oakland U. So I was doing both of those at the same time. Then I left Wayne State for a while because I took the public school gig and I couldn't do both. But right now I'm back on the faculty at Wayne. I have one private jazz voice student.
Does your husband still teach at Wayne?
He is retired.
He's retired. Okay.
My husband had a 42-year career at Wayne State.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
As a junior faculty, senior faculty, chairman of the department, and then he ended up in the dean's office. He was an associate dean in the College of Performing and Fine Arts, and then he was a professor again, but he is now retired. And I'm retired from public school teaching. So we're both retired.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, so you have a lot more time to do what you wanted.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I'm just like going back for Wayne State for a minute. Please, so is Chris Collins the one that took over for your husband as head of the jazz department?
I believe so. So Chris is actually a former student of my husband's.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, Chris Collins played in my husband's jazz band and combos, and then Chris, became such a brilliant solo artist and teacher and performer on his own. Then he and my husband became colleagues, and they would play on the bandstand in each other's bands a lot together.
Okay.
And they were at Wayne State for a very long time, and the jazz program has had a couple of different directors. Dennis, my husband Dennis was one, Dennis Tini. Then it was Matt Michaels. Oh, and right. I believe after Matt, I think it was Chris Collins.
Chris, okay.
Yep. And we love Chris. We're good friends with Chris and his wife. We admire what he's done as the president and creative director of the Jazz Festival, of course.
Yeah.
But, also as a performer, we all know how brilliant he is, but he's also a great teacher. He's been a great teacher and mentor. He's elusive because he's so busy. But
yeah, there's a lot going on.
When I tell, like, the vocalist that I have right now that's studying with me, she has Chris for a combo. And I said, when you're in the room with him, you soak up everything that he has to say. You listen to every word and you do everything that he has to say because he's brilliant.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah, I've interviewed him for a while ago when he first took over the Jazz Fest a number of years ago. And just what he's done with the festival itself has been amazing. So
he's incredible. Yeah, so we crossed paths at Wayne State. Yeah. And Chris and Dennis have a long history.
So how long did you, once you left Wayne State, and you say you went to West Bloom schools?
West Bloomfield.
Public schools.
There was an opening for a middle school choral director, like a middle school, choir director. And I was called, somebody, my cousin was actually helping them fill this void. And she said, hey, there's this job opening and I think you'd be perfect for it. And I said to my husband, I've been teaching college and, working at Berkeley and Wayne State. Why am I going to want to go to public? He goes, well, you have your teaching degree, first of all. Second of all, think about the family friendly hours. And I was that. The thing about university teaching, Veronica, what I was doing was I wasn't doing a lot of classroom teaching. I was doing ensembles and performing and private voice. And all of those are like second half of the day. from
Mm-hmm.
like 2 or 3 o'clock on.
Yeah.
So if my daughter was getting off the school bus at 3 o'clock and I'm going down to Wayne State, and I
Mm-hmm.
said, no, that's not why I had a child. Fortunately, I was in a position, some people are not in a position to,
Mm-hmm.
make their schedule work, but Dennis and I
Right.
worked it out together. We tag teamed and for a while. And then I said, all right, I'll go interview for this position. What the heck? So it
Mm-hmm.
seemed intriguing enough. I had a red carpet to build something from scratch at West Bloomfield
Mm-hmm.
Schools. And having directed Gold Company to Gold Company, Northwest,
Mm-hmm.
all these things, I knew exactly how to build a program. I just
Right.
didn't know I didn't know how to discipline junior high kids. I had to learn
Yeah, I
that.
would say you're going to a younger demographic, so I'm sure it has its
Uh,
challenges.
I had some challenges in management,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
musically, I was like, oh, give me this, man, we'll have fun. And sure enough, man, I
Mm-hmm.
fell in love with the kids. The kids and I had
Mm-hmm.
a great rapport. I was able to build a solid program that parents loved, kids loved, administrators loved, the community loved. And although I missed the high level music making that I could do with college kids, you really have
Mm-hmm.
to, you got to scale it back. I was able to touch so many lives and really
Yeah.
light fires. And so many of my former students went on, to have career in the air. So I loved it. I had a blast, and I did it for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I just retired in June. So I missed
Oh,
the
really?
kids,
Wow.
I missed
Okay.
the kids, and I missed the community. But I
Yeah.
think it was time just for me to end that chapter.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was
That's
a blast.
awesome.
I loved it, and I
Yeah.
did a
Yeah. Yeah.
little bit
Oh,
of
sorry. Go
jazz with
ahead.
them. Not
Oh,
so much
awesome.
jazz. I did a little bit of jazz, not so much. Most of that was traditional choral, pop choral, and show
Mm-hmm.
choir. And I did a lot of musical theater at the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. A lot of musical theater. So not so much jazz, but I continued as a jazz vocalist. I would do all kinds of jazz singing in town while I was teaching. And that was hard. I got tired. You teach all day, and then you go sing a gig at night. That's pretty hard on your voice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And I was actually gonna just back up to just I was looking again at your bio, just how your former students, just how they've gone on to develop professional careers. I was kind of intrigued by Ryan Destiny, who's become like just amazing with the show Star and all that.
Yeah, isn't
Was
that
she
cool?
your student in the choral?
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, I had Ryan from 6th to 8th grade.
Hmm.
She came in at, 11 years old, singing like a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year later, she's writing songs. She'd say,
Hmm.
can I stay after school and play your piano?
Mm-hmm.
Or can I stay after school and show you the song that I wrote? And
Mm-hmm.
then, so of course, of course. So I just listened to her, really. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't really looking for a lot of coaching, but I kind of just listened to her and throw a suggestion here and there. But I mean, her stuff is all her stuff. I take no credit for it. I just had a nice program that she liked being a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And we showcased her, not because she was talented, but because she worked hard.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
got showcased because she worked hard. She
Mm-hmm.
devoted her whole self. So then she was doing the girl group singing thing before she left me, before she left
Okay.
junior high. She'd bring in her two friends and she'd say, hey, I wrote this 3-part harmony. Can you listen to us? And then they'd
Mm-hmm.
sing these 3-part harmony, Beyonce,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Beyonce style,
Destiny Child, yeah.
Destiny's Child, thank you,
Mm-hmm.
style stuff. And I'm like, wow, how do you guys hear that? Good for you. And
Mm-hmm.
and so Ryan and I just had a relationship. She knew she could trust me. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't judgy, telling her what she should do or how she should do it. I rather just
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah, man, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And, every once in a while I'd say, try this, or she'd say, I'm having a trouble hitting this note. What do you think? So it was that
Mm-hmm.
kind of, and then she went on to high school and she got a really good showcase in education at West Bloomfield High School as well. And she,
Mm-hmm.
credits not only me, but the high school director as being in
Yeah.
her corner as well. And she's so gracious because when she comes back to town, she was also a member of Mosaic.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
when she
Yep.
comes back to town, she visits Mosaic, she visits
That's
us. And
awesome.
she came back several times to talk to my students. And
Oh,
I never
cool.
felt like a rock star until that day. They're pounding on my door because the Ryan Destiny's inside. And,
Right.
but she was the real deal. She was
Mm-hmm.
the real deal
She's
kid.
very talented. Yeah.
Worked hard, wanted to educate herself. And that's the best kind of student, somebody who works hard and they want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, you can definitely see that. Like you said, the work ethic is, I think, the most important. And like not just being talented, but you got to put the work in.
And she had it. And that's why it was fun to work with her, because she was so willing to work hard.
Wow, that's awesome. And I'm sure, like, so you have tons and tons of stories of other students of yours that have gone on and had these
Yeah.
amazing careers. And, you know, like I said, it makes you probably feel good to know, like, I played a hand in their success or whatever. So
It does. That's paying it forward, because people did that
yeah.
for me. But you know what's kind of funny about in the public schools? Like, I've got a couple students who are like college and football stars. And that makes me glad. Like, you know, I remember that kid when he was singing, using his Michael Jackson voice, you know,
Yeah.
coming in my
Right,
room
right.
singing, never can say goodbye, when he's 11 years old. And now he's, you know, he's I don't know, they're on the Seahawks or something. It's just
Right.
funny, you know, that cracks me up. But lighting the fire for young musicians is a privilege. And then the responsibility that becomes fulfilling is creating an environment where they can have a space and a place in their school day. They come to choir and they can't wait. Choir is their favorite hour of the day. Or some kids it's band, some kids it's gym, you know. But for them to tell me, or orchestra, the kids love orchestra, you know, or musical theater. God, the kids love musical theater. And they would just come and say, choir and musical theater are my favorite parts of the day. Thank you so much, Mrs. Tini. And at that point, you're not even really imparting brilliance. You're just creating a space for kids. You hope that you're imparting brilliance, but you're really not. You're just creating a space for these kids. And then you pontificate and you give them everything, and they just take what they can. They take in what their 12-year and 13-year-old brains can take in. Oh, I'm supposed to shape a vowel like this. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm supposed to breathe from here. Oh, okay. I mean, if they get a couple things, you're lucky. But really what they get is they get a feeling of family, a sense of belonging, a place where they know they can be, you know, included. That in the end was the best.
That is amazing. Yeah. And I have a young son too. I can't wait till I can see kind of what hobbies or just things that he wants to do. Like I said, whether it's his music, or I definitely want him to like learn to play the piano and all that. And just seeing that, like I said, young people, and seeing them get excited about that kind of stuff is just amazing. So,
and there's a lot of great public schools and that offer great programs with great teachers. You know, I'm no kind of exception. I'm just in the mix of all there's a lot of great teachers out there. So yeah, just getting the kids involved in an art. I always say, get the kid involved in an art and a sport.
I agree.
Right?
I totally agree. So I just wanted to take a few minutes too, just to kind of talk about, I know we spent time talking about your educational, but I would definitely want to get into, like, you know, your vocalist background, just, you know, jazz singing and all that. Like maybe tell me about some experiences, you know, just singing in Detroit, or any maybe residencies you've had at different jazz clubs, things like that.
Sure. So being a jazz vocalist is a multifaceted, complex journey. And you're forever listening. You got to listen from the beginning to all the great singers that ever were, and a lot of great instrumentalists too. You got to listen, and then you got to, you know, through osmosis, take that stuff in. You experiment with it, and then hopefully you find your own voice. And the only way you're going to do that is by listening and practicing on your own. And then you got to go out and do it. And at first it's really scary, because as a vocalist, there's no button to push. You know, a pianist can go, here's an E flat, here's an E flat chord. They push a button. Yeah, they have kind of a ton of skill in order to do it, right? But there's a button to push. You can see it. It's physical. The voice is completely intangible. And it's a part of your body. So you have to nurture your own health in order to nurture your own body. I found that what you eat and drink absolutely affects your voice. The amount of sleep that you get, and then the way you use your voice when you're not singing. Like if you teach all day and you abuse your voice talking and screaming, you're not going to have anything left to sing. So, you know, so it becomes a balance. And People who sing for a living, like people who do Broadway shows, and they've got, they got to do 8 shows a week, and they have to have their voice in perfect shape. They will tell you it's not an easy life, because you gotta watch what you eat and drink, and you gotta work out your body, and you gotta get enough sleep, and you kind of can't do this because it's going to hurt you, and you can't, you got to take care of yourself. So that's a big part of it, lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
And then the complexity of delivering the music of jazz. I mean, we could talk another hour and a half about that, Veronica, because as a vocalist, you're responsible for the lyric. And I believe that's the most important thing. But you got to deliver the lyric in a nice package if people are going to listen to it. And the nice package is your voice, your vocal technique. Now, your sound is what it is. You're born with your voice, just like you're born with brown eyes, or you're born with, red hair, or you're born tall, or you're born short. You're born with this voice. So you work just like an athlete works to build the muscle and build the strength and build the flexibility and all that stuff that, and that's your technique. But then you gotta, then you try to find your own sound by experimenting. And you can only do that really, I think, in the practice room, and then taking it to the bandstand. And in the midst of all this, you got to deliver this great song with these poignant lyrics that mean something. And then, you also have to like improvise, because that's jazz. So it's very complex. On the bandstand, for me, I just had to be prepared. That was the only way I could ever go on the bandstand, is if I were prepared. And preparation means, you delve into I don't know how many songs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs on lead sheets, like stacks like this, and I have them alphabetized in my little file, and I go and I pick out songs. Okay, I need 16 songs for this night at this club. So I picked out 16. You got to vary the styles. It's got to be some ballads, some up tunes, some medium tunes, some Latin, maybe some original, some funky, some blues. You got it, right. So you prep, get all your tunes out, then you put them in order. You make your tune list. You make the copies of the tunes so that you can put out, you got to get the piano player a book, and the bass player and the trumpeter and the drummer. They each get a book of all your tunes in order. And on top of it is your tune list, so they know what's going on. Because when you're the vocalist, unless someone else is designated as the band leader, you're the leader.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy burden too, because you gotta call all the tunes, you gotta know the keys, you gotta know the form of how it's gonna go down, you gotta start it, you gotta end it, and yet you're the one delivering everything to the audience. So it's a heavy burden that you have to be prepared for. You gotta practice, you gotta keep your voice in shape. On the bandstand is the most heightened concentration I ever have in my life. I have to be so in tune with what the piano player is doing, so in tune with what the bass player is doing, so in tune with how the drummer is reenacting to those. And there's usually a trumpeter or sax player here, and you're gonna interplay with them. You gotta be a part of that you gotta be a part of that amoeba, and you have to stand out and deliver as a soloist as well.
Yeah.
So your mind is multitasking, and jazz, it's not pop music. Jazz is so complex that your ears and your brain have to be so concentrated, and your voice has to be so on point, that, it's a real rush and a thrill and a gas when it goes well. There's nothing like it. When you're sitting in the middle of a great groove, and all 5, you're in a quintet, everybody's grooving, everybody's feeling it, it just gels. And generally there's no practice for that. You step on things and you do it.
Yeah.
When it gels, it's great. And sometimes it doesn't. And you're spending a whole tune you're communicating a lyric to the audience, but nothing is gelling back here. So you're trying to figure out how to get in the, so you're problem solving at the same time. I mean, it's great and it's wonderful, but it's hard. Hard. And I think that the more you do it, the better you get at it, the better you get at gelling right away, the better you get at problem solving on the bandstand, the more you know how to prep, and then you got to play your audience. You got an
Mhm.
audience of younger people, that's one thing. You got an audience of older people who want to hear Gershwin, that's a different thing. You
Right.
know, you're playing a jazz festival, you better have a heavy jazz tune lineup with a lot of improvisation. But you're
Mhm.
playing a little supper club in the background, you don't have to have such a heavy repertoire. So
Mhm.
you got to know the venue you're playing,
Yeah.
and then you prep your set for that venue.
Mhm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I guess did you have any when you got it more into like the jazz vocal side? Like, did you have a lot of influences or vocalists like Billie Holiday or Ella Fitzgerald that you kind of looked
Yes,
to for inspiration?
I did. I always loved Ella, but I don't sound anything like her. So it
Mhm.
was hard for me to relate. Uh, I related more to Sarah Vaughan because
Mhm.
her voice was deeper and fuller and richer and smokier. And I don't sound like anything like her either, but I could at least relate to her. And I related a lot to Carmen McRae.
Mhm.
My voice really, I could. So Sarah and Carmen McRae and Betty Carter were
Mhm.
my three female jazz vocalists that I related most to. And then I loved Mark Murphy, who
Mhm.
was a a now deceased male vocalist who was just, his interpretation of songs and his phrasing and delivery, I just loved.
Mhm.
And then I loved Nat King Cole, but again, like Ella, Nat's voice was so spectacular and so sumptuous and so wonderful, but I couldn't relate to it because Ella and Nat King Cole have lighter voices,
Mhm.
and my voice is not light. So I could
Mhm.
never, in Chet Baker, light, I couldn't relate to the lighter voices. Billie Holiday, even her voice is high and light.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could relate to her pain
Mhm.
and her phrasing and her angst, that I could relate to, but not the vocal quality.
Mhm.
So for me, as a struggling jazz vocalist, I had to go to the people's voices that I could relate to more. And those ended up being my influences.
Yep, that totally makes sense. So
Another,
I don't know. Oh, I'm
one
sorry.
of
Go ahead.
my other favorite influence was Al Jarreau.
Oh
Now, and it's
yeah,
because
Algero.
from him, what I got from him was the agility and the flexibility and the creativity. I just
Mhm.
loved what he did with the tune. So
Yeah, Algero is amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
and like I said, I did you have a chance to actually meet him when he was at Berkeley when he got?
I don't think I did. I
Mhm.
don't have a memory of meeting Al Jarreau, but I've seen him a handful of times in concert,
Mhm.
and he's every bit as good live. And that's the thing about the jazz artists. They're every bit as good live as they are on
Mhm.
record. Sometimes
Yep.
you can't say that for the pop artists
Yeah, that is true.
because there's magic in the studio, but with
Yeah.
the jazz artists, man, they're even better live than they are
Mhm.
on recording because you can't
Yeah.
believe what they're doing in the moment. And
Yeah, I think it
he,
leaves more room for even improvisation as well when you're live. I hear so
yeah,
many artists scatting, and you don't hear that on record, but it comes across when you're seeing them in person. So I love that
exactly.
aspect of it. hmm I guess maybe if you're able to talk about just maybe some of the jazz clubs you frequented or just around the Metro Detroit area or
Yeah, sure. Before I get to that, I want to say one last thing about being a jazz singer. The
Mhm.
art of vocal improvisation is a little bit enigmatic. It's been honed in recent years. There are people who are good enough at it where they have put on paper, techniques and exercises to help you become a better scatter. But it's singers are notorious for, if they haven't studied improvisation, for not being great improvisers. That's
Mhm.
been changing, in maybe the last couple decades, because there are great jazz voice teachers out there who can teach you improvisation.
Mhm.
But I learned most of my stuff. I'm not a great improviser. I'm capable,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't, I'm good, not great as an improviser. But I learned most of what I learned from listening to horn players and
Mhm.
imitate. Like I'd listen to Dexter Gordon or Sonny Rollins, my two favorite saxophone players, and then sing, and Miles Davis too, and then sing. You learn their lines and then you sing them. And I would
Mhm.
do that with Ella too, learn her lines and sing them. And so I studied on my own. Then I took some lessons. I took a few piano lessons from Buddy Budson. I took some lessons with Matt Michaels. And I took some lessons from people out in Boston too, just to try to get the harmonic language to be a better improviser. And it still eludes me, the high level stuff, but being a jazz improviser is very difficult. So when you hear a good one, it's a huge skill. Okay, so jazz venues, you know, I guess my favorite place to perform has always been the Michigan Jazz Festival. And my husband and I, Dennis is a pianist, a wonderful jazz pianist, and he had his own groups for years. And he would incorporate me in the quintet, and we played the Michigan Jazz Festival. I don't know how many times. It has to have been well over a dozen. And I would get to create a set where it was great jazz tunes, and he put together an amazing group of instrumentalists, and we do some really nice sets. So the Michigan Jazz Festival has been my favorite place to perform. The Detroit Jazz Fest, I actually had a chance to perform there with some school groups. I never really did my own set at a Detroit Jazz Fest, but I did perform as with some school groups, and that was fun. There used to be a place called, oh God, what was it called? Arriva. It was like a showroom on the east side, and they had a nice stage, and I remember doing some sets there that were really fun at Arriva Jazz Club. It was kind of like a mini Andiamo showroom, but that's since closed. I recently had a chance to do an educational thing at Aretha's Jazz Cafe at Music Hall. That was fun. Coaching, we did a clinic for the Michigan Jazz Festival, coaching students there. So then I've done a lot of solo work at I did a lot of solo concerts at Oakland University and a lot of solo concerts at Wayne State because I was jazz faculty there. I've done some concerts at Schoolcraft College. And then there were some supper clubs in town that had a rotating jazz vocalist that they would like to feature. And those were fun. There was a place called Nicola's, and I played Nicola's. I did a lot at Nicola's, and that was really fun. It's not really a jazz club, it's just a great restaurant that
I've heard music there before.
Nicola's, and then there's a place called O'Malley's.
O'Malley's,
and they feature jazz, and I had a lot of nice sets there that I've enjoyed playing. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. There's a lot of nice hotels. You know, we played the Townsend, and there have been a lot of restaurants in town that I'm sorry, Steinway Jazz Cafe. That's a nice place to play. Steinway Jazz Cafe. We've done music there. There's a place in Dearborn called Joe's Top Dog, Coney Island.
I saw Kate there a couple years ago. Kate Patterson.
That was a fun place. Our friend Rich Michaels had the band there. And he used to book singers in there all the time. That was fun. And Dennis and I've been married for 30 years. And the first 10 years, we really played a lot of places around town, but many of them were restaurants and supper clubs, private parties. I've done I think the majority of the work I've done has been private parties. So some of the greater named jazz clubs I have not played. Like I have not played, Baker's or the Dirty Dog or the Blue Llama. I haven't had the opportunity to play those clubs. But I will say that the last couple years pre-pandemic and since post-pandemic, I took a little hiatus from singing just because my voice really did get tired. And now
Right.
that I'm retired, one of my goals is to get it back up and get back out there singing. And I'm slow to do that, but I hope to
Mhm.
be able to do that, you know, to pull it
Yeah,
back.
yeah, for sure. Like
So
you
I've
said, it'll
got,
definitely give you a lot more space or time to
Mhm.
dedicate to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other place where I've had a lot of opportunity to play has been jazz festivals around the country. Now that has nothing to do with Detroit, but um,
No, yeah, I
I,
definitely want to hear about that for sure.
yeah.
Like, any outside opportunities you had as well.
So I was I have served as an adjudicator and clinician at jazz festivals all over the place. A lot of many of them were educational, like I've performed and adjudicated down in Disney World,
Mhm.
and also Disneyland. I have performed and adjudicated all throughout Canada, you know, from Vancouver all the way to Halifax and
Mhm.
everywhere in between. I was a judge and a performer at music festivals.
Mhm.
And also, you know, there were clubs, there were, I don't know, not really big name, but I mean, I've done clubs and concert halls and festivals throughout, you know, in Boston and in Chicago and out in Colorado, the University of Northern Colorado Jazz Festival, which is a big one. I've adjudicated that. So I've been to Japan, uh, um, teaching and singing there. And in Europe, my husband and I did some things in Europe together, in Switzerland and in Italy.
Mm.
I served as a teacher and a performer at a camp in Italy.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think my bio says I have performed and educated in throughout Canada, United States,
Mm.
and then in Europe and in Japan as well. And
Yeah. Yeah, that's
so,
awesome. And this has all been like when you've been also like teaching at Wayne State and OU. This is throughout
yes,
that period.
and
Okay.
Berkeley.
In
Yeah,
Berkeley.
it's kind of started there.
Okay.
So it was all, yes, it was mainly during the college teaching years.
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, I'm going to wrap up in just a second too. I didn't want to take up too much of your time. I guess maybe if you, I know you mentioned in your bio that you had done some jazz recordings. Was this something that you had done solo? Or was this part of like with your vocal groups as well, or?
Um, I do have a couple of recordings from the Berkeley College Vocal Jazz Group. We did a recording, and the Wayne State Vocal Jazz Ensemble did a recording as well. And then as a vocalist, I have appeared on projects. I don't have my own recording. I don't think I ever really wanted to, which is why I didn't go for it, but I have appeared on um, Matt Michaels has a CD called Matt Michaels and Friends, and I'm
Mhm.
on that. And Dan Jordan, who's a bass player, he has several recordings of Brazilian songs that he's written English lyrics for.
Mhm.
So it's a series called Interpretation.
Okay.
The series of the recordings is called Interpretation, and I'm on several of those with him. And then my husband has several recordings, and I'm on some recordings with the Dennis Tini Quintet.
Okay. And then just last question. I guess I always try and end this with this question to for all of my interviews. But obviously, like being we talked about this at the beginning, being a female jazz musician. Obviously, like there are a lot of uh does say stereotypes, but you just hear about, obviously like, it being easier for male musicians to get ahead than female. Sometimes there's certain obstacles you have to face just being a female in the music industry. But I guess, is there maybe advice you would give to for females that are particularly going in down the path of jazz? What you would tell them if they're trying to.
I think it's no different than I would tell any student, but
Mhm,
they have to, they really have to work hard and hone the craft and
mhm,
own their brand, create their brand, own their brand. But it's got to be through hard work. Like if they want to get work as a jazz pianist, they have to be at a level of standard. And that standard
mhm.
isn't male, female. That's just a standard.
Yeah.
Do you know these 200 jazz tunes? Do you
Mhm,
know how to play these scales? Can you improvise on the bandstand? Black,
mhm.
white, male, female, old, young, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That's the standard. So they have to prepare themselves, and the only way to do that is to work hard.
Mhm,
Um, and if they own their own brand, and if they know enough about the music industry, so taking music business classes is a good way to go to, then they don't
mhm,
have to depend on a male figure to push them forward, to
mhm,
get them gigs, to write their material.
mhm,
They can do it. They should be able to write their own material. They should be able to fend for themselves in the business, get their own gigs, and then hold their own on the bandstand, whether they're the leader or not. And if they can do those three things, come up with their own material, get their own gigs, and then hold their own on the bandstand, then they're going to be okay, whether the band is filled with men or whether the band is filled with women,
mhm,
or so the other piece of that is that as a singer, and especially a female singer, you have to be educated musically as well as vocally. It's not
mhm,
enough really just to have a great voice and to be able to deliver a song and to be a good performer. If you want to hold your own, you've got to know music. You have to
mhm,
know, I think, a little bit about the piano, and you have to understand how chords work. So a music background is going to help. And
mhm.
not having a music background could potentially harm you. So you gotta, take music theory. Sometimes you can
Mhm.
get that with piano. So I
Yep.
always recommend piano. I think
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
not easy, but it's the easiest way, I think, to
Mhm.
learn.
Yep. That totally makes sense. And I totally agree. Like you said, it shouldn't matter regardless of gender. I think the work ethic has to be
Yeah,
there from the beginning. So,
yeah.
yep.
I think the whole, we could talk about like, sexism and inappropriateness
Mm,
but that to me, that's beside music.
mm.
That's lessons outside of music.
Yeah. Because if
If
you're
you
good, somebody's gonna know it.
Well, if you can hold your own, you're not gonna,
Mhm.
you shouldn't have a lot of problem,
Mhm.
if you can hold your own.
Yeah.
Um, Veronica, I wanted to mention there were a couple of symphony gigs that
Mm.
I did that I really enjoyed.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I've
I was
sung
gonna
with
ask
the
you like anything that I missed when we were talking that you wanted to
Well,
bring up.
you didn't miss it. I got to go back a long way now because I've been singing for a long time and I haven't done it for a couple of years. So I got to really go
Mhm.
back to,
Yeah.
I should have brought my Vitae out because I've got it listed all there. But anyway,
Oh
it
yeah.
doesn't
If you want
matter.
to send that to me later, you can definitely do that as well. That'd be helpful.
Okay. It's so old.
Mhm.
I'll find it and try to scan it and get it to you.
Okay.
Um, but so Dennis and we did some nice performances with the Grosse Pointe Symphony
Okay.
and the Pontiac Oakland Symphony. And Matt Michaels had written some charts, orchestral charts for my voice in an orchestra. And that was a
Mhm.
thrill. To
Mm.
sing with an orchestra was a thrill. And
Mhm.
I've also sung with the John Trudell Big Band,
Oh yeah, Johnny Trudell. Yep. Yep.
sung with John Trudell and his big bands and his small groups. And I sung a lot with Matt Michaels and his groups, and a lot with my husband Dennis and his groups. But the symphony gigs were fun.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of goes back to you, like you say, having that classically trained, background in college that kind of prepared you to perform with the symphony.
A little bit, even though what
Mm.
we were performing was jazz.
Okay.
We
I'm
the
thinking it was
music,
classical music. Okay.
yeah, the music was jazz. No, we were
Okay.
performing as a jazz. We were a jazz quintet,
Gotcha.
that was backed by the symphony. Like the
Okay.
jazz quintet was in front, and in the background are the strings and the horns playing like,
Yeah.
background chords. But it was, so it was a jazz, it was like a symphonic jazz concert.
Okay.
If that
Gotcha.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I love hearing jazz with strings. There's so many obviously recordings. I'm just thinking about like, Charlie Parker, Clifford Brown, just so many. I love hearing strings with jazz music. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I think those might have been on my, again, like I said, just if there's anything that may have missed, or sometimes I always tell when I do an orchestra, like, when I ask you about something that may have happened a long time ago, and like, if you can't recall, or you think about it later, like, feel free, email me or call me and like, hey, I just thought of that,
Yeah.
whatever. You can definitely do that. I don't want to feel like this is the only opportunity. Or if you think of like a ton of other stuff, we can do another interview as well. I just want to make sure, like, that you had opportunity to talk about everything that you feel is important for your orchestra interview.
Okay. Yeah. So, let me, all right. So is your email veronica@issuemediagroup.com?
Yep, that's my work email. So you'll definitely like if you email me through that, I'll see it.
All right. I've got that. Okay. So I've got that. And I will,